Between 1347 and 1353, the Black Death swept through Europe, claiming an estimated 25 to 50 million lives, devastating up to 80% of some urban populations. The plague was relentless, leaving a trail of loss in its wake. Yet for those who endured, the world was forever altered. Let's explore what life was like in the shadow of this catastrophic event. Before we dive in, if you enjoy diving into history like this, give a thumbs up or hit subscribe. It helps me know you're out there. I'm curious about you all, so drop a comment with your city and the time where you are. It's wild to think some of you might be sipping coffee in Paris while I'm up late recording this in the US. All right, let's journey back to post-plague Europe. Buckle up. It's a haunting but fascinating ride. First, though, get comfy. Grab a blanket, fluff your pillows, because this story will pull you into a world that's both distant and eerily vivid. Imagine waking in the dim light of dawn. The straw-stuffed pallet beneath you is cold and slightly damp, soaked by the moisture creeping through the thin walls of your modest home. For a fleeting moment, life feels ordinary. You feel the rough weave of the mattress, smell the faint char of last night's fire lingering in the air, and hear a lone rooster crowing in the distance. Then, a heavy stillness hits you. No chatter fills the streets. No rhythmic clanging from the blacksmith's forge. No children's voices. No footsteps. Just an oppressive quiet. Picture your own street, but 4 out of every 5 homes are empty. That's the reality we're stepping into. You rise, your bare feet meeting the chilled, hard-packed earth of the floor. Medieval homes weren't exactly cozy by today's standards. No polished hardwood or plush rugs. Most floors were compacted dirt, sometimes strewn with rushes or straw that might go unchanged for months, even years. Hygiene wasn't a priority, which, as you can imagine, made disease control nearly impossible. Research into medieval living conditions revealed that entire families, and sometimes livestock, shared cramped spaces for warmth. Beds were simple, sacks filled with straw, hay, or, for the fortunate, wool. Privacy? That was a luxury few could even dream of. Your whole household might sleep in one room, with animals nearby to fend off the cold. Stepping outside, the morning sun casts a pale glow over a village forever changed. The sky, streaked with hues of crimson, feels like an ominous warning. You walk toward the baker's shop, where the scent of fresh loaves once greeted the dawn. Now the door swings loosely on its hinges, the shop abandoned. The baker, his wife, their children, all gone, taken by the plague or fled in fear. Your mind races. Are there any survivors? Logic tells you there must be, but your heart feels the weight of isolation. You head toward the village square, a place that once buzzed with life. Before the plague, it was a hub of activity, merchants haggling over goods, villagers hauling buckets from the communal well, church bells tolling from morning prayers. Now the well stands unused, its bucket swaying in the breeze. The church doors are barred. The only sounds are the faint chirping of birds and the creak of empty market stalls caught in the wind. "Anyone there?" you call, your voice echoing in the stillness, sounding strange even to your own ears. A rustle breaks the silence. An elderly woman steps from a nearby doorway, her face hollowed by hunger and grief. She clutches a bundle of herbs, rosemary, sage, and lavender, pressed tightly to her face. "Keep your distance," she warns, her eyes sharp with distrust. Do you carry the pestilence? The pestilence. That's what many called it then. Others named it the Great Mortality, or simply the sickness. The term Black Death wouldn't appear in records until centuries later, likely inspired by the dark spots caused by subcutaneous hemorrhages on victims' bodies. No, you managed to say, your voice catching as you think of your own lost family. She nods, her expression softening slightly. No words are needed. Loss is a language you both understand. Her herbs, you notice, are a desperate shield against what people believed was the cause of the plague, miasma, or bad air. Medieval medicine held that foul odors carried disease, so people carried posies of fragrant herbs or burned incense to purify the air. It was a futile gesture against the true culprit, Yersinia pestis, a bacterium spread by fleas on rats, a fact unknown to the 14th century world. The woman gestures toward the edge of the village. She says, the priest is tending to the dead. They're digging pits beyond the fields. Burial traditions had collapsed under the weight of the death toll. Historical accounts, like those from chroniclers in Siena and Florence, describe how the sheer volume of bodies overwhelmed communities. In some cities, the cost of burial shrouds soared tenfold, yet there weren't enough hands to dig individual graves. Mass pits became the grim solution, with bodies stacked without ceremony, sometimes covered only by a thin layer of dirt. In Paris, records indicate over 500 bodies a day were buried in such pits at the height of the plague. The sacred rituals of death, masses, processions, individual graves, gave way to survival's harsh pragmatism. You follow the path the old woman pointed out, cresting a small hill, and the sight below stops you cold. A handful of figures labor in the distance. Some shovel earth, others haul shrouded bodies toward a gaping trench. The air grows heavy with a sickly, cloying stench of decay long before you reach them. Brace yourself, because this scene is about to get stranger. The person overseeing this grim task isn't the village priest as you'd expect. He succumbed weeks ago. Instead, it's the local butcher, his hands accustomed to carving flesh, now directing the burial of the dead. "We need help," he barks as you approach. No pleasantries, just a blunt call for labor. In a world where half or more of your neighbors have vanished, every able body is vital. Picture this. By 1349, in cities like Florence, the death toll was so staggering that survivors couldn't keep up. Bodies were layered in mass trenches. Corpses, a thin scattering of dirt, more corpses, more dirt, like a grim lasagna of loss. Modern archaeology has uncovered these sites, like the plague pits found in London's East Smithfield, where over 600 bodies were stacked with chilling efficiency. The scale was unimaginable. In some regions, entire neighborhoods were entombed this way, with no time for proper rites. The hours blur as you join the work, hauling bodies of people you once knew, the miller's daughter, the cooper's youngest, a family from the village's edge. Their skin is mottled, swollen with the dark, painful lumps in their groins or armpits that marked the plague's cruel signature, known then as buboes. The butcher, wiping sweat from his brow, mutters, "Last week a traveler came from the next village, said it's empty now, everyone dead or gone." Imagine that, whole settlements erased. Historical records back this up.
Across England, deserted medieval villages like Wareham Percy show sudden abandonment during the plague years, their fields left to weeds, their homes to ruin. By noon, your stomach aches with hunger. You haven't eaten since yesterday. With the baker gone, bread is a memory. With farmers dead or scattered, who's tending the crops? This is where the economic fallout of the Black Death began to reshape society. Food prices soared as supply chains collapsed. Chronicles from Siena note that staples like grain doubled or tripled in cost overnight, while delicacies for the sick, like honeyed cakes or preserved fruits, became luxuries only the wealthy could afford. Poultry prices spiked so high that a single chicken could cost a laborer's weekly wage. You wandered to the marketplace, hoping to find something to eat. A lone vendor, an elderly man with sunken eyes, guards a cart with a few shriveled turnips and a small sack of barley. A cluster of survivors haggles desperately. 8 pennies for that measly loaf? A woman snaps, her voice sharp with outrage. Take it or go hungry, the vendor retorts, unmoved. He's not wrong. Fields lie fallow, crops rot unharvested, and livestock roam untended. In parts of Europe, records show herds of sheep and cattle starved or were slaughtered by desperate survivors, their caretakers claimed by the plague.
Suddenly, a church bell clangs, wild, uneven, not the steady call to prayer. The small crowd freezes, then hurries toward the sound. At the church, a gaunt man yanks the bell rope with frantic urgency. "Riders!" he shouts, "from the east!" A chill runs through the group. Riders could spell trouble. Bandits exploiting the chaos. Tax collectors demanding dues despite the devastation. Or worse, refugees carrying the plague's return. Whispers ripple. Some urge hiding, others defiance. Your pulse races, thoughts spiraling. Is this how it ends? Raiders or disease? Before a plan forms, the riders appear at the village's edge. It's the Lord's Son back from a nearby town, flanked by armed men and a cart piled with sacks of grain. His father, the local lord, fell to the plague months ago. "I've brought food," he declares, his voice steady but weary. "But I need hands for the fields. I'll pay triple the old wages." This moment is a turning point, a crack in the old order. Before the Black Death, peasants were tied to the land, toiling for meager scraps at the Lord's whim. Now, with labor scarce, some estimates suggest 40 to 60% of Europe's workforce perished. Survivors held newfound power. Workers could demand higher wages, better conditions, even freedom to move. In England, the 1351 Statute of Laborers tried to cap wages, but enforcement was weak. Workers defied it, sparking a shift toward a more fluid economy. This moment, a negotiation between lord and laborers, was unthinkable before the plague. The catastrophic loss of life, with estimates suggesting 30 to 60% of Europe's population perished, upended the rigid feudal hierarchy. Chroniclers like Matteo Villali in Florence noted that survivors suddenly found wealth within reach. Those who once toiled in poverty inherited land, tools, or goods from relatives lost to the plague. A peasant who owned nothing could wake up as the master of a small estate with coins or cloth to trade. The social order, once ironclad, was fracturing. You spend the afternoon unloading sacks of grain from the Lord's cart, distributing portions to hollow-cheeked villagers.
As dusk paints the sky in shades of amber, you trudge back to your silent home. The quiet is still jarring, a stark contrast to the lively chaos of your family's presence before the plague. Yet, amid the emptiness, a faint spark of possibility stirs. The house, once your parents', is now yours. The tools your father shaped, hammers, sickles, a worn plow, are yours to wield or barter. The modest strip of land, though small, is more than you ever dreamed of owning. As you kindle a fire in the hearth, the day's events settle in your mind. Yesterday, grief and shock consumed you. The pain remains, a heavy shadow that may never lift. But now there's something new, a flicker of opportunity. The Black Death, a catastrophe that claimed millions and left survivors reeling, also reshaped the world in unexpected ways. Land lay unclaimed as entire families vanished. Wages soared as lords competed for scarce labor. Social mobility, once a fantasy, became tangible. This wasn't a golden age, far from it. The emotional toll was crushing. The poet Petrarch, writing in 1348, captured the despair. O happy posterity, who will not experience such abysmal woe and will look upon our testimony as a fable. Survivors carried scars, both visible and unseen, as they navigated a world stripped bare.
You sink onto your straw pallet, a far cry from the soft beds we know today. The house feels vast and empty without the familiar press of family. Parents, siblings, perhaps an elderly aunt or cousin, all sharing the cramped space. As sleep pulls you under, questions swirl. Will more survivors appear tomorrow? Can the fields be sown before it's too late? Will the plague creep back? Unlike the safety of a modern home, with its locks and warmth, a medieval survivor faced each night with gnawing uncertainty. Yet life persisted, fragile but stubborn. By the next morning, the village feels subtly different. A faint hum of activity greets you as you step outside. The square, nearly deserted yesterday, holds a few more faces, some familiar, others strangers, likely sole survivors from nearby hamlets drawn by whispers of food and work. The Lord's Son is there, rallying workers for his fields, still promising those extraordinary wages. But something new catches your attention. A sharply dressed man, unfamiliar to the village, is locked in a heated argument with the Lord. His voice carries, sharp and defiant, drawing curious glances from the growing crowd. "This land is mine now," the stranger declares, brandishing a crumpled parchment. "My cousin died heirless. I have the rightful claim." The Lord's Son bristles, his hand twitching toward his sword. "Your cousin was my father's tenant. This land belongs to my family." The tension crackles, revealing yet another strange ripple of the plague's aftermath. Property disputes erupting everywhere. With entire families wiped out, distant relatives crawled out of obscurity, clutching vague claims to estates. Historical records from the 1350s overflow with such conflicts. Courts in England and France were swamped with inheritance cases, as family trees brutally pruned by death left unexpected branches vying for control. In some regions, legal battles over land dragged on for decades, reshaping local power dynamics.
A crowd forms, drawn to the heated exchange. Beside you, a weathered farmer spits into the dust. "Let them bicker over their titles," he grumbles. "Who's planting the fields? We'll all be starving by winter."
His words hit hard, while nobles and ambitious newcomers squabbled over land deeds. The urgent need for food hung in the balance. Owning vast estates meant little if no one was left to sow or harvest. A woman nearby, a small child clinging to her tattered skirt, turns to you. "You worked for the old lord, didn't you? Will you take to the fields again?" You pause, weighing your answer. Before the plague, choice was a foreign concept. Your life was bound to the land. Now, possibilities glimmer. 10 pennies a day is decent, you venture. She shrugs, a sly glint in her eye. The tanner in the next hamlet's offering 14 for anyone who can cure hides, lost his whole crew to the sickness. Pause here. This moment is seismic. This casual talk of seeking better wages, of weighing options, was unthinkable in the old world. Before the Black Death, serfdom chained most peasants to their lord's estate, their labor dictated by custom and obligation. But with 30 to 60% of Europe's workforce gone, survivors held unprecedented leverage. In England, the 1351 Statute of Laborers tried to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, but workers ignored it, moving to where pay was highest. This shift sparked the first cracks in feudalism's foundation. The argument between the lord's son and the stranger escalates. "We'll settle this in the king's court," the lord's son snaps. The stranger laughs bitterly. "The king's court? Half the judges are dead, and the rest have fled to their manors. Who'll hear your case?" He's not exaggerating. Historical records show judicial systems crumbling. Courts in London and Paris postponed sessions for months, sometimes years, or limped along with makeshift officials. The plague had gutted institutions as thoroughly as it had villages.
Curious about the tanner's offer, you follow the woman and her child through the village. As you walk, you notice something unsettling. Doors ajar on empty houses, their contents spilling into the open. "People take what they need," the woman explains, catching your glance. "No one's left to claim it." Inside one abandoned home, you spot a figure stuffing a sack with iron tools, a wool cloak, a chipped ceramic bowl. Not theft, exactly, but a pragmatic redistribution in a world where ownership had lost its clarity. This wasn't just happening with household goods. In Florence, chronicler Giovanni Villani wrote of survivors amassing wealth from abandoned riches, bolts of silk, gold coins, fine tapestries. A laborer who once scraped by could suddenly inherit a fortune, upending the social order. The woman leads you to a crossroads where a small, impromptu market has sprung up. Just a few blankets spread with goods, but these aren't typical wares. Glinting in the sunlight are silver candlesticks, embroidered linens, a carpenter's adze, even a jeweled brooch. Items once far beyond a peasant's grasp. "Where'd this come from?" you ask, though the answer is grimly obvious. "The dead don't need finery," says a man behind the display, his calloused hands missing 2 fingers, betraying a lifetime of toil. "Found a trunk full of this in my master's house after his family perished, trading it for what I can use." You reach for a silver goblet, then hesitate, a pang of guilt halting your hand. It feels wrong to profit from such loss. The man notices, his voice steady but weary. "Lost my wife and sons in a week. You think I wanted their trinkets? But life goes on. Take what's left and make do." Historical accounts echo this pragmatism. Survivors overwhelmed by loss often had no choice but to repurpose the possessions of the dead, not out of greed, but necessity. In some regions, markets like this became common, trading the spoils of a shattered world. You barter your old iron dagger, a trusted companion for years, for a thick wool blanket, once a luxury that would have cost a month's wages. As you fold it carefully, the woman with the child rests a hand on your arm. "The tanner's down that path," she says, nodding toward a narrow trail. "If you're curious." The tannery sits on the outskirts of the next village, its sharp stench, urine, lime, and rotting hides, reaching you long before the low-roofed shed comes into view. Tanning was a vital but reviled trade in medieval times, often banished to the village's edge due to its foul odor. The process involved soaking hides in urine or animal brains to soften them, a grim necessity that made your stomach churn. Historical accounts describe tanneries as so pungent that nearby residents often petitioned to have them relocated. The tanner, a broad-shouldered man with arms like oak branches, glances up from scraping a hide as you approach. "Here to work?" he asks bluntly, skipping pleasantries. "Maybe," you reply, testing the waters. "Heard you're offering 14 pennies." He grunts. 16 now. Another worker bolted yesterday. Not sick, just grabbed some silver from an empty house and headed for London." He shakes his head. "Fool. Cities got hit hardest." You're right. Urban centers like London and Florence saw death rates of 50 to 70%. Their cramped streets and poor sanitation fueling the plague's spread. Rural areas, while not spared, often lost closer to 30%, giving them a slight edge in recovery. The tanner shrugs. "Never tanned before? No matter. Can you follow orders and stomach the mess? I'll teach you the rest." Before you can respond, a clamor erupts from the village square, frantic bells and raised voices. You and the tanner exchange a wary look and hasten toward the noise. A rider, his horse frothing and exhausted, stands in the center of a growing crowd, gulping water from a dented tin cup. "The bishop proclaimed all church debts forgiven," he announces, "a mercy for those left alive." Whispers ripple through the listeners. This was monumental. Peasants often owed lifelong debts to the church, which held vast estates across Europe. In 1349, records show some dioceses, desperate to rebuild trust and labor, waived these obligations to encourage survivors to stay and work the land. "What about the king's taxes?" a voice calls. The rider's laugh is sharp and bitter. Tax collectors tried 3 villages nearby. 2 were chased off with sickles and clubs. The third vanished. This wasn't an exaggeration. Historical documents reveal tax collection collapsed in parts of Europe. Royal coffers in England dwindled by nearly 40% in the plague's wake, as collectors faced empty villages or hostile survivors. An older man, his hands marked by years of crafting, steps forward. "And the guilds, are they opening their ranks?" Before the plague, craft guilds, tight-knit groups controlling trades like weaving or smithing, were fiercely exclusive, demanding long apprenticeships and connections to join. "The Weavers' Guild needs anyone who can work a loom," the writer replies. "Lost half their members and orders are piling up." This was a game changer. Guilds, once gatekeepers of wealth and status, were forced to lower barriers. In cities like Bruges, records show apprenticeships shortened from 7 years to as little as 2, as guilds scrambled to fill gaps left by the dead. For survivors, This meant access to skilled trades and social mobility previously out of reach. Weighing his offer. 16 pennies a day is more than you'd earn in 3 weeks of field work in the old world. But the stench, the grime, it's daunting. Sensing your hesitation, he leans in. Try it for 3 days. If it's not for you, I'll pay what you're owed. No grudge. Before you can answer, a woman pushes through the crowd, striding toward the tanner with purpose. Master Fuller, she says, I'm here for the job. The tanner blinks, surprised. You? But you're a woman. Yes, she cuts in, her voice steady. My husband was your best worker before the plague took him. I helped him for years. I know the trade as well as any. This was another seismic shift. The labor shortage cracked open doors for women, who began entering trades like tanning, brewing, and weaving, roles once rigidly male. In 14th century London, records show women taking over deceased husbands' workshops, some even joining guilds, a rarity before the plague. The tanner scratches his jaw, skeptical. Ever done the heavy work? Scraping, hauling hides? She meets his gaze with a dry smile. I've birthed 5 children and buried 3. I can manage a hide. Her words carry the weight of a world turned upside down, where survival demanded new rules. A ripple of laughter spreads through the crowd at the woman's bold counteroffer. The tanner, caught off guard, lets out a gruff chuckle. 16 pennies, same as the others. 20, she fires back, unflinching. The crowd falls silent, stunned by a woman negotiating wages so brazenly, an act unthinkable in the pre-plague world. The tanner scratches his beard, then nods. 18, my final offer, and you train this one. He gestures toward you. Agreed, she says, her voice firm. Just like that, you're an apprentice tanner, learning under a woman and earning wages that would have dwarfed a master craftsman's pay before the Black Death. The old order is crumbling before your eyes. As the crowd thins, the rider continues sharing news from beyond the village. Towns are granting citizenship to any skilled worker who'll settle, he says. Landlords are slashing rents to keep tenants, and merchants who once catered to nobles are now trading with anyone who has coins. You follow your new mentor back to the tannery, the air thick with the acrid stench of hides and lime, a smell you'll soon know too well. I'm Agnes, she says over her shoulder. Why tanning, you ask? Surely there's less foul work out there. She slows, matching your pace. My husband didn't die of the plague, she says softly. 3 years back, a wagon crushed him, leaving me with 5 children and no way to feed them. I begged the tanner for work, but he turned me away, said it wasn't fit for a woman. I scraped by, mending clothes, barely surviving. Her lips curl in a wry smile. Now he needs me more than I need him. The world turns, doesn't it? Her story reflects a broader shift. The plague's devastation opened doors for those long marginalized, women, laborers, even the disabled in some cases. With labor so scarce, skills were suddenly valued over tradition. In 14th century England, records show women stepping into roles like brewing and blacksmithing, often inheriting their husbands' workshops. Necessity, not progress, drove this change, but it reshaped society all the same. At the tannery, Agnes hands you a grimy apron and points to a stack of raw hides. First, scrape off the flesh and fat, she instructs, wielding a curved blade with practiced ease. Leave too much, the hide rots. Take too much, the leather's worthless. The work is gruesome. Within an hour, your hands are slick with gore, your shoulders burn,
and the stench clings to your skin. Yet there's a strange satisfaction in the process, turning something raw and bloody into the beginnings of something useful. By noon, hunger gnaws at you despite the foul air. Agnes calls a break, and you rinse your hands in a bucket before sharing a modest lunch of rye bread and a wedge of cheese provided by the tanner. "He never fed workers before," Agnes remarks, noting your surprise. "Food prices have tripled, but he knows we could walk away and find better work by nightfall." Indeed, employers were forced to sweeten conditions to compete for labor. In Italian cities like Siena, ordinances from the 1350s tried to cap lavish worker benefits, free meals, lodging, even clothing, to curb escalating costs, but enforcement was spotty. "Where are you staying?" Agnes asks as you eat. You hadn't considered it. Your family's home is in the next village, a long trek after a day's labor. She nods toward a ramshackle shed behind the tannery. 2 workers used to bunk there. It's empty now. Not much, but it keeps the rain off. After lunch, she guides you through the next step, soaking the scraped hides in a foul vat of water, lime, and urine. Yes, human urine, collected in barrels. Medieval tanning was not for the faint-hearted. Everyone pitches in, Agnes says with a deadpan grin, pointing to a bucket in the shed's corner.
By dusk, your body aches from the unfamiliar toil, and the smell has seeped into your very pores. But as the tanner hands you 18 small silver coins, glinting in the fading light, a new feeling settles in: autonomy. Before the plague, your life was mapped out, tied to the same fields as your ancestors, surrendering most of your harvest to the Lord, your fate dictated by forces beyond your control. Now, these coins in your hand represent choice. You think of the silver goblet at the crossroads market. A week's wages could buy such luxuries. But what then? Silver doesn't fill your belly or warm your bones. Instead, as twilight falls, you head back to the market, trading 1 coin for a stout tallow candle, a crusty loaf, and a chunk of hard cheese, practical necessities for survival. That night, in the tanner's drafty shed, you light your candle and eat a meal better than most you knew before the plague. The flickering flame casts shadows on the rough walls, and for the first time, you feel the weight of a new world, one where your labor, your choices, might shape what comes next.
Tomorrow's wages will add to your growing stash of coins. Perhaps you'll save them, or maybe trade for a sturdy cloak or a set of tools. The future is murky, but for the first time, it feels like yours to shape. As you settle onto your straw pallet, not so different from the rough bedding of your old life, a realization dawns. In this shattered world, where death has stolen so much, it has also carved out a strange gift: freedom. Unlike the cozy predictability of a modern bedroom, medieval survivors like you faced a reality where the old certainties had collapsed. It was terrifying, yes, but brimming with possibilities that would have been unimaginable mere months ago. In the months ahead, as society unraveled and rewove itself, those possibilities would spark both opportunity and conflict as Europe groped toward a fragile new normal in the plague's wake.
3 months into your apprenticeship, the tannery's stench no longer phases you. "That's how you know you're one of us," Agnes says with a grin, her knife flashing as she scrapes a hide under the summer sun, when the smell fades into the background.
Villagers still steer clear when you pass, wrinkling their noses. Better than any charm, Agnes teases. Keeps folks too far to pass the plague. She's half right. Superstitions about the disease's spread run rampant. Some cling to the miasma theory, blaming foul odors, while others swear it travels through a glance or a breath. The tannery's reek, though vile, offers an unexpected shield, keeping others at a cautious distance. The tannery hums with work. With so many dead, surviving livestock outnumber people, flooding the market with hides to process. Your hands are now rough with calluses, your arms stronger, and your coin pouch reassuringly heavy. "Master Fuller," a voice calls from the road. A finely dressed man on horseback, likely a merchant, approaches, a cloth pressed to his face against the tannery's odor. The tanner wipes his hands and steps forward. "I need 60 leather hides by month's end, saddles and harnesses for the king's campaign in France. There's a good coin for those who can deliver." 60? The tanner frowns, scratching his jaw. That's steep. I've only got 4 workers. The merchant glances at you and Agnes, raising an eyebrow. 4? Including her? Agnes bristles, gripping her knife. "I outworked both men last week," she says sharply. Historical records confirm this tension. Women who filled male-dominated roles during the labor shortage often faced skepticism, but raw necessity forced acceptance. In 1350s England, women were documented running tanneries and breweries, their contributions undeniable.
The merchant hesitates, then turns back to the tanner. 6 shillings per hide. The tanner nearly sputters. 6? It was 3 before the plague. "Take it or leave it," the merchant replies coolly. "Every tanner within 30 miles is getting the same deal." After he rides off, the tanner gathers his small crew. You, Agnes, a young lad who joined last month, and an older man, once a farmer, who lost his family to the plague. 60 hides in a month is possible, he says, but it'll mean working from dawn to dusk. I'll pay you each 28 pennies a day. Agnes folds her arms. 32. 30, he counters swiftly. And Sundays off for church, the older man adds. The tanner sighs. Fine, 30 pennies, Sundays free, but we start at first light. As he walks away, Agnes nudges you. Before the plague, he'd have scoffed at our demands. Now he haggles like we're his peers. This shift was widespread. A Norfolk landowner's diary from 1350 laments that workers had grown arrogant, demanding wages that upended the feudal order, a dynamic that would later fuel uprisings like the 1381 Peasants' Revolt. By the summer of 1350, 3 years after the Black Death first struck, Europe's countryside was transforming. Peasants weren't just earning more, they were living better. You see it in your own life. Your wages have bought you a small stone cottage, its previous owners lost to the plague. You've traded straw for a proper mattress stuffed with wool, and your meals now include meat twice a week, a luxury once reserved for feast days. On your next free Sunday, you walk to the village church, its cavernous interior dwarfing the shrunken congregation. The new priest, the third since the plague claimed the others, is young and jittery, rushed through training to fill the clergy shortage. "Brothers and sisters," he begins, voice wavering, "let us pray for those enduring God's great trial." An elderly woman stands, her voice sharp. "If this is God's judgment, why did it spare the greedy bailiff and take my innocent daughters?" The priest fumbles. "God's will is beyond our understanding."
Another voice cuts in. "Was it God's will that the Jews poisoned our wells?" This vile rumor, rampant across Europe, sparked brutal pogroms. Entire Jewish communities in cities like Strasbourg were massacred, scapegoated for the plague. No evidence supports such claims, the priest says firmly, echoing Pope Clement VI's 1348 edict condemning the accusations. But why did it follow the trade routes, someone demands? They're not wrong. The plague spread via merchants and rats, though the true cause, Yersinia pestis, remained unknown. Outside the church, conversations buzz. The miller's prices are tripled, one man grumbles. No good cloth since the weavers died, another adds. A craftsman chimes in. My brother's gone to London. Artisans can name their price there. The world is topsy-turvy. What was cheap is now dear. Scorned jobs are now prized, and the powerless now have options. You join Agnes, who's chatting with a group of women. Told him I won't marry unless I keep my tattery work and my wages. And? A young woman asks, wide-eyed. He agreed, Agnes laughs. Before the plague, he'd have found another bride. Now, men need partners more than we need them. The labor shortage reshaped relationships too. Widows and widowers, common after the plague, formed new unions with shifted expectations. In 1350s Flanders, records show women negotiating marriage contracts to retain control over their earnings, a rarity before. Passing the manor house, you see the young lord, now lord in full, his father's death confirmed, overseeing renovations. New glass windows, a lavish upgrade, catch the sunlight. Nearby, laborers rest in the shade. Tanner, one calls. Tell Martin what you're earning. You share your 30-penny wage, earning whistles of approval. See, the man says to his friend, and he's just an apprentice. We should demand more. Martin scoffs. The Lord won't budge. Then we walk, the first retorts. See how fast his grand windows get done. This collective bargaining was revolutionary. Before, lords could punish defiance with whippings or worse. Now, workers held leverage, a dynamic that would culminate in rebellions like the 1381 Peasants' Revolt.
The next week brings a stranger to the tannery. Master Fuller, he says, dismounting a horse. I'm from the Tanners' Guild in St. Albans. We've heard of your work here. The tanner's eyes narrow. What's it to you? He snaps at the guild representative. I've been tanning hides for 30 years. My leather's better than most of your guilds. The visitor, undeterred, straightens. The guild demands oversight. You're operating without standards or membership. Agnes leans close, whispering. Before the plague, they'd have crushed him without a second thought. Guilds held all the power. The tanner lets out a sharp laugh. And if I tell your guild to shove it? The visitor's face flushes. We have authority. Authority, the tanner cuts in. Half your guild's dead, and the rest can't keep up with orders. You need me more than I need you. Shifting tactics, the visitor softens. Join us, and we'll guarantee no one undercuts your prices. We set rates for all members. Membership's usually £5, but we'll lower it to £2 given the times. The tanner strokes his chin. £1, and my workers stay. No guild approval needed. They haggle, voices rising and falling, before striking a deal. As the visitor rides off, you turn to the tanner. Why join at all? You said they need you more. He nods. For now. But times shift. Better to have a voice in the guild than fight them forever. A sly grin spreads across his face. Plus, we can charge guild prices now. By the autumn of 1350, a new obsession grips the village, warding off disease. Strange rituals, unthinkable before the plague, now shape daily life. At the market, you notice traders clutching sprigs of herbs to their noses, avoiding direct contact when passing coins. Many wear small cloth pouches around their necks, plague amulets, stuffed with rosemary, sage, and wormwood. Keeps the bad air away, a vendor explains, offering you one for a penny. Wear it always. You spot Agnes with one, though she shrugs when you mention it. Can't hurt, she mutters. A woman down the lane swears it saved her family. It was pure superstition, of course. Herbs were useless against Yersinia pestis. But in a world without germ theory, people clung to any hope of protection. Records from the period describe similar practices across Europe, with some towns mandating herb pouches or scented oils to combat miasma.
Other habits, born of desperation, prove surprisingly effective. Villagers boil water before drinking, burn the dead's clothing rather than reusing it, and isolate newcomers for a week before letting them mingle. These measures, though rooted in misunderstanding, stumbled onto public health principles. Boiling water killed pathogens. Burning clothes destroyed flea habitats. Quarantine slowed contagion. In Florence, chronicles note that such practices, adopted through grim trial and error, reduced secondary outbreaks by 1351, though no one understood why. One evening, as you finish scraping hides, thick smoke rises from the village's edge. Curious, you follow it to find a group tending a bonfire of straw mattresses and tattered garments. "Winter purge," an elderly woman explains, her eyes fixed on the flames. "Clearing out anything that might carry the sickness before we're shut indoors for the cold." This, too, was unwittingly wise. Destroying bedding disrupted flea populations, a key vector for the plague, especially in winter when cramped homes fostered disease. As winter looms, you reflect on how your life has transformed in a single year. Once a field laborer bound to the land, you're now a tanner's apprentice with a trade. You've traded a crowded family hut for a modest cottage with a proper wool-stuffed bed. Your meals, once meager, now include meat several times a week. More striking is the newfound respect you command. Villagers who once overlooked you now haggle with you, value your skills, and seek your opinion. You're no longer a faceless pair of hands, expendable in the fields. One chilly November evening, you sit in the village alehouse, a small luxury your wages now afford. The new bailiff, barely older than you and thrust into the role by necessity, steps inside. Before the plague, bailiffs were the Lord's enforcers, often despised for their heavy-handedness. This one seems nervous, his authority untested. He raises his voice. "The Lord needs 4 men to mend the mill before winter. 5 days' work, 35 pennies a day." A few months ago, such a wage would have been unthinkable, a fortune for a week's labor. The alehouse patrons barely stir at the bailiff's offer. 35 pennies an ale," a man by the hearth calls out, his tone half mocking. The bailiff, visibly frustrated, opens his mouth to protest, but sighs instead. "Fine," he mutters. "Who'll take it?" 3 men eventually step forward, but only after wringing out promises for specific hours and extra rations. The bailiff slinks out, looking drained. "The old lord would have broken a man's ribs for such a cheek," an elderly patron remarks, nursing his drink. "Now they're practically groveling for our labor." Agnes, sharing a mug with you, leans closer. "This won't last," she murmurs. "The lords and merchants, they'll claw back controls soon enough." She's more prescient than she realizes. Even as you savor your newfound status, the elite are already scheming to restore the old order. In England, the 1351 Statute of Laborers will soon cap wages at pre-plague levels. In France, similar edicts aim to curb worker demands. But for now, in this fleeting moment between the plague's devastation and the reassertion of hierarchy, ordinary people wield a rare power: leverage. Later, as you walk back to your cottage, the village feels transformed, not just by the empty homes or dwindled faces, but by signs of progress. Huts once made of wattle and daub now boast stone foundations. Open windows, once covered with crude shutters, shimmer with oiled parchment or rare glass panes. Survivors are pouring their new wealth into better lives. Inside your cottage, you light a beeswax candle, a small extravagance that outshines the smoky tallow of old. Your bed, now stuffed with wool instead of straw, cradles you comfortably. A sturdy iron pot hangs by the hearth, replacing the fragile clay one you once used. To modernize, these upgrades might seem modest, but in 1350 they were revolutionary. Stone homes stayed warmer and drier, reducing illness. Wool mattresses deterred fleas and improved sleep. Better cookware allowed heartier meals. Research shows that plague survivors, spared by later outbreaks, often lived healthier lives than their ancestors, thanks to improved nutrition and living conditions. A small but measurable uptick in life expectancy.
As you drift towards sleep, you ponder the paradox of your era. A world gutted by death, yet brimming with opportunity for those left behind. Your wool bed, a far cry from today's plush mattresses, feels like a throne compared to the straw pile of a year ago. Tomorrow promises new challenges and possibilities as society reshapes itself. The old world is gone, erased by the plague's wrath. What rises in its place is still taking form, and for the first time, people like you have a hand in molding it. Spring of 1351 arrives, carrying a tense undercurrent. Nearly 2 years after the Black Death's peak, the village has settled into new rhythms. You've mastered tanning, your hands deft, and your wages, once unimaginable, now steady. Agnes, now the tanner's wife, insisted on keeping her job and her earnings, a bold stand that's become a quiet legend. But something's stirring. You sense it in hushed market whispers, in wary glances when pay is mentioned. Then, one morning, the village crier strides into the square, his voice booming. "Hear ye! Hear ye! By decree of our sovereign, King Edward III, new laws are now in force across the realm." A crowd gathers quickly. Royal proclamations rarely reach small hamlets. Unrolling a parchment, the crier continues. All laborers, artisans, and servants must accept wages and terms as they were in 1346, before the great pestilence. A murmur spreads, growing louder. Wages from 1346? That's less than half what most earn now. Furthermore, the crier shouts over the din, it is unlawful for any able-bodied man or woman to refuse suitable work when offered. Violators face fines or imprisonment. The crowd erupts, anger flaring. A rotten apple sails toward the crier, who dodges and reads on, voice straining against the chaos.
These laws are decreed for the realm's welfare, to prevent ruin from exorbitant wages and idle hands, the crier proclaims, his voice strained as he finishes the scroll. You're witnessing the Statute of Laborers, enacted in 1351, a desperate bid by the elite to claw back control. Landlords, nobles, and wealthy merchants, shaken by soaring wages and workers' newfound mobility, sought to rewind time to the pre-plague era. As the crier hurries off, the village erupts in furious debate. They can't enforce this, a blacksmith bellows. Who'll make me toil for half my worth? A woman gripping a basket of turnips snaps back, The king's sheriffs, fool, they'll lock you up if you defy them. Master Fuller shoulders through the crowd toward you and Agnes, his face dark with anger. Back to the tannery, he mutters. Inside the workshop, away from prying eyes, he paces restlessly. This is trouble, real trouble. You're not cutting our pay, are you? Agnes asks bluntly. The tanner drags a hand through his graying hair. Not if I can avoid it, but they're posting enforcers in every county. They'll check guild ledgers, question workers. So what's the plan, you ask? He lowers his voice, though the shed is empty. On paper, you'll get the old wages, but a sack of grain might find its way to your door. Firewood could pile up outside your cottage, maybe a cloak for winter, gifts, not payment. Such covert arrangements were widespread. Employers, valuing skilled workers, skirted wage caps with in-kind benefits, food, lodging, tools. In 1350s England, records show some lords quietly defied the statute, paying extra in goods to keep their workforce, though they risked heavy fines.
2 weeks later, the law's teeth sink in. The weekly market halts as a sheriff and 5 armed men ride in, dragging a carpenter to the square. They force him to his knees. This man demanded 4 pennies a day for work on the church, the sheriff declares. The legal rate is 2. He's guilty of violating the king's statute. The crowd watches, tense and silent. His punishment: 4 days in the stocks and a 30-shilling fine. The carpenter is locked into the wooden frame, his wrists and neck pinned, exposed to jeers and the biting spring wind. "Let this warn you all," the sheriff shouts. "The king's law will not bend." That night, under cover of darkness, villagers slip to the stocks, offering the carpenter water, bread, even a blanket during a sudden drizzle. These quiet acts of defiance speak volumes. Away from the sheriff's gaze, talk turns bold. "The nobles are scared," a grizzled trader who roams between villages explains. "They've always held us down. Now we've got power. They're leaning on the king to break us." "Can they really turn back time?" a young woman asks. The trader scoffs. "They'll try, but they can't wish away the truth. There aren't enough of us left to control." He's right. The plague's toll, 30 to 60% of Europe's population gone, created a labor shortage no law could erase. In England, the statute of laborers was flouted in rural areas, where sheriffs struggled to enforce it. A month later, the tanner gathers his small crew. "The guild's been ordered to track every worker's wages," he says, his voice heavy. "Random inspections are coming. Anyone caught taking extra, workers and employers, face steep fines." "So are deals done?" you ask, dread settling in. He nods, regret in his eyes. "They're watching too closely." Overnight, your wages are slashed to pre-plague levels. The life you've built begins to fray. First, the small comforts vanish. No more meat with every meal. No more beeswax candles. Then, bigger sacrifices follow. Unable to afford your cottage's rent, you pack your belongings and return to the tanner's cramped shed, its drafty walls a stark reminder of your fragile gains.
The setbacks you face are not yours alone. Across the village, those who had tasted a better life, new homes, finer goods, now feel the squeeze of the new laws. The fleeting window of opportunity is narrowing. Yet humans are resilient, especially when survival is at stake. New ways to push back emerge.
One evening, as you struggle to turn the soil for a small garden behind the tanner's shed, a farmer's widow approaches. "Need help with that plot?" she asks. "I can't pay you," you admit, wiping sweat from your brow. "Not asking for coin," she replies with a smile. "I've got more cabbages than I can eat, and that leather belt you're crafting would fit me nicely." Bartering becomes a lifeline, a way to sidestep the rigid wage controls. Trading goods and services, vegetables for leather, labor for tools, skirts the spirit of the statute of laborers, but is harder to police than cash payments. In 1350s England, records show such exchanges flourished, as communities found creative ways to maintain their gains despite royal edicts. Resistance takes bolder forms, too. Work slows to a crawl. If you're paid half your worth, why hurry? One afternoon, as you scrape a hide at a leisurely pace, Agnes raises an eyebrow. "Taking your time, aren't you?" "Half the pay, half the speed," you reply, keeping your voice low. She glances around, ensuring no one overhears. Careful, the guild's cracking down on slow workshops. The pressure is mounting. Master Fuller, once a fair employer, grows irritable, caught between guild demands for higher output and a workforce dragging its feet. "I could replace you," he snaps after catching you resting mid-task. "With who?" you retort, emboldened by the labor shortage. "Good luck finding anyone who can mix a lime vat properly." It's a tense standoff. You need the work, meager as the pay is. He needs your skills, which would take months to teach anew. Neither can afford to walk away.
News from the cities paints a darker picture. A travelling peddler, stopping at the alehouse, shares tales from London. Guilds are hiring brutes to scare workers, he says, lowering his voice. Anyone caught taking above legal wages gets a late-night visit. Beatings, smashed workshops. How do people fight back? A patron asks. The peddler's eyes glint. They're organizing in secret. Hidden meetings, coded signals. Some whisper of rebellion, but that's risky talk. He taps his nose. Spies are everywhere. Indeed, the rise of informants was a grim feature of the time. Authorities offered bounties for reporting wage violations or worker gatherings, sowing distrust. In 1352, English court records document neighbors betraying neighbors for small rewards, fracturing communities. One morning, you arrive at the tannery to find Agnes pale and shaken. "They took Martin last night," she whispers. "Martin, the grizzled farmer turned tanner who'd mentored you, was arrested." "What for?" you ask, though you suspect the answer. "Sheriff claims he was rallying workers to demand higher pay," she says, rubbing her arms nervously. "They'll make an example of him." 2 days later, that example unfolds in the village square. Martin, hands bound, is dragged before a restless crowd. The sheriff reads the charges: incitement, conspiracy against the labor statutes, defiance of the king's law. The penalty is brutal: branding with an F for false, oath-breaker, on his cheek, followed by a month in prison. As the branding iron glows red in the fire, the crowd grows agitated, muttering, shifting closer. The sheriff, sensing the mood, orders his men to form a tight ring around Martin. The tension crackles. Violence feels imminent. Then, a wealthy trader, who's profited from cheaper labor, steps forward. "If I pay his fine, will you spare the brand and jail?" he asks. The sheriff hesitates, then nods. Coins change hands.
and Martin is freed with a stern warning. The crowd scatters, the moment diffused.
Later, you approach the traitor. Why step in? He shrugs, his tone pragmatic. Don't paint me as a hero. Trouble here hurts trade. A riot's bad for business. His intervention wasn't altruism, but self-interest, a reminder that even acts of mercy carried complex motives in this turbulent time. The merchant's response is blunt. A branded, jailed man makes nothing and spends nothing. Bad for trade. A riot would be worse. His cold pragmatism reveals a deeper truth. The economy, even under restrictive laws, must keep turning. There's a limit to how far the authorities can push before the system collapses. Through 1351 and 1352, this delicate balance holds. The statute of laborers remains in force, its punishments real, but on the ground, countless small workarounds and compromises keep life moving. Some workers slip away to regions with lax enforcement. Coastal towns like Bristol, you hear, pay twice the legal wage for skilled hands, with local officials turning a blind eye to keep their ports thriving. I could head to Bristol, you muse to Agnes one afternoon, scraping hides. Start fresh, where no one's watching so closely. She frowns, and be a stranger with no allies when the next plague strikes. Here, we've got people who'll stand by us. She's right. The plague forged bonds among survivors. Shared loss and resilience create a community newcomers can't easily join. In 1350s England, records show villages often rallied to support their own, pooling resources to defy wage caps or shelter fugitives from sheriffs.
By late 1352, 5 years after the Black Death's arrival, a strange new normal takes root. On paper, the old hierarchies are clawing back control. In practice, a web of resistance, bartering, slowdowns, under-the-table deals keeps workers from sliding back to their pre-plague status. You see it at the Christmas feast in the village church. The latest priest, replacing the nervous young man who didn't last, leads a prayer before the communal meal. Glancing around, you notice a subtle shift in the seating. Before the plague, nobles dined apart, elevated above craftsmen and peasants in a rigid pecking order. Now the lines blur. The young lord, now head of his family, sits only slightly separated. Conversations flow freely across ranks, united by shared loss and adaptation. The food tells its own story. Despite wage curbs, the spread is richer than pre-plague days. Roasted mutton, hearty barley stew, even dried apples. With fewer mouths to feed and the same farmland, per-person food production has surged. Historical data from England's manorial records shows a 20 to 30% increase in available calories per capita by 1352, boosting survivors' health. As the feast winds down, an impromptu dance sparks to life. You find yourself paired with a weaver's daughter, a match that would have raised eyebrows before the plague. Moving through a lively reel, you catch fragments of talk swirling around. Thinking of petitioning the king's court for fair pay. Can't find a roofer who'll work for legal wages. Sheriffs taking coin to ignore violations. Heard there's unclaimed land in Yorkshire. Each snippet reflects the tug-of-war between royal decrees and lived reality. The statute of laborers has tempered the wild wage spikes of 1349, but it hasn't fully restored the old order. In some regions, court records show up to 40% of wage violations went unpunished, as sheriffs, short-staffed themselves, prioritized pragmatism over strict enforcement. walking back to your shed under a crisp winter sky, your belly full, your mind wrestles with contradictions. Life is tougher than a year ago, when wages soared to dizzying heights. Yet it's still better than it would have been without the plague's upheaval. The stars overhead gleam, timeless witnesses to a world reshaped by catastrophe. From their vast perspective, the Black Death is but a fleeting chapter, devastating, transformative, yet transient in humanity's long saga. That thought brings a strange comfort as you settle onto your straw pallet, a far cry from a modern mattress, but a step up from the dirt floor of your youth. Despite the elite's efforts to freeze time, change persists, sometimes in bold proclamations and punishments, sometimes in quiet acts of defiance and adaptation. Tomorrow you'll return to the tannery, working for less than your worth, but more than your parents ever dreamed. You'll navigate this shifting world, balancing compliance with subtle rebellion, carving out a place in a society still finding its shape. You'll endure, as humans always do, by bending to the winds of change. Unlike the secure predictability of modern life, medieval survivors lived with constant reminders that nothing was certain. Not health, not status, not the social order itself. The Black Death had etched a hard truth into their bones. Everything could unravel in an instant, a lesson no one could unlearn. 10 years have passed since you became a tanner's apprentice. Now, at 30, you're a master craftsman, having inherited the workshop 3 years ago when Master Fuller succumbed to a winter fever. Agnes remains by your side, her deft hands still shaping hides, while she trains her eldest daughter, Joan, in the trade. The world has shifted subtly. The raw terror of the plague has dulled into a heavy memory, though its scars linger in every survivor's heart. Labor shortages have eased as children born post-plague reach working age, stabilizing wages, lower than the dizzying highs of 1349, but still above pre-plague levels. In England, records show wages for skilled workers in 1360 settled at roughly 50% higher than 1346 rates, a lasting gain despite the statute of laborers. Another change runs deeper. How people view disease. You first notice it when a merchant brings word of a plague outbreak in a town 30 miles away. In the past, such news would have sparked chaos, people fleeing, unwittingly carrying the disease with them. Now, the response is measured. The town's council sealed the gates, the merchant explains, sipping ale at the market. No one enters or leaves until the sickness passes. Even the healthy? Someone asked, incredulous. Everyone, he confirms. They leave food outside the walls, no contact with outsiders. This is a stark shift. During the first outbreak, panicked flight spread Yersinia pestis along trade routes. Now, communities are learning quarantine works, even if they don't grasp why. By the 1360s, Italian cities like Venice were formalizing such measures, with health boards enforcing isolation protocols that reduced secondary outbreaks. Your village headman calls a meeting to prepare for a potential outbreak. The mood is tense but composed, not from fearlessness, but from hard-won pragmatism. We need plague wardens, the miller suggests, to check homes for signs of sickness. Nods ripple through the crowd.
The concept of public health officials was taking hold across Europe. Venice's 1348 health magistracy, one of the first, monitored sanitation and disease, a model spreading to other regions. "We'll need a place to isolate the sick," Agnes adds, "far from the village center." The group agrees on a derelict barn at the outskirts to be scrubbed and fitted as a pest house, a dedicated space to quarantine the infected, keeping them from the healthy.
As the meeting disperses, the priest approaches you. "I need leather," he says brusquely. 60 hides, enough for a full body covering." "For what?" you ask, intrigued. "Protection," he replies. "A physician in France tends plague victims in a leather suit, with a bird-beak mask stuffed with herbs to block the foul air." He's describing an early version of the plague doctor costume. Waxed leather or canvas cloaks, gloves, boots, and a mask with glass eye holes and a beak filled with rosemary, camphor, and cloves. Rooted in the flawed miasma theory, these outfits inadvertently shielded wearers from flea bites, the true vector of the plague. First documented in France around 1350, such gear would become iconic by the 17th century. You agree to supply the leather, curious about this odd contraption. When it's finished a week later, the priest dons it, looking like a bizarre bird-human hybrid, equal parts absurd and unsettling. "If the plague comes," he says, gesturing to the glass-covered eyeholes, "I can tend the sick without falling ill." Word spreads, and soon others request similar gear. Your workshop begins specializing in protective wear, tweaking designs based on users' feedback, an unexpected niche born of necessity. Across Europe, similar innovations emerged, from quarantine laws to early sanitation practices, as communities groped toward survival. The loss of up to 2/3 of university-trained physicians during the Black Death has reshaped medicine, pushing it from rigid theory to practical experimentation. Survivors test new methods, share what works, and discard what doesn't. As summer 1365 brings sweltering heat and renewed fears of disease, your village adopts a novel practice. Every household with sickness must tie a white cloth to their door, the headman declares. No one enters or leaves except plague wardens or the priest. This marking system, designed to isolate the infected, spreads across Europe. In England, some towns paint red crosses on plague-stricken doors. In Italy, guards are posted outside affected homes. The aim is clear: containment through separation. Historical records from 1360s Florence show such measures curbed outbreaks, though the science behind them was unknown.
A new development reaches you via an Italian leather merchant haggling over a batch of tanning lime. "Venice has a facility on an island in their lagoon," he says. "Any ship suspected of carrying plague must anchor there for 40 days before entering the city." 40 days, you ask, skeptical? That's excessive. "40 giorni," he replies with a shrug. "Long enough to ensure no hidden sickness emerges. They call it quarantine." This marks the birth of modern quarantine, originating in 1377 at Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, a Venetian-controlled port before spreading to Venice itself. By isolating ships, Venice avoided major outbreaks while other cities suffered. Does it work, you press? "Venice has dodged the worst since they started," the merchant says. "Other ports haven't been so lucky." Your village adopts similar caution. When a messenger arrives from a nearby hamlet reporting illness, he's stopped at the boundary. He leaves his letters in a vinegar-filled bucket where they soak for hours before retrieval. Vinegar,
thought to cleanse plague-tainted objects, was a common disinfectant in the 1360s. While it couldn't kill Yersinia pestis, its acidity disrupted some pathogens, a small step toward modern sanitation. By 1365, nearly 2 decades after the Black Death's first wave, medical knowledge has evolved through trial and error. The true cause, fleas on rats, remains a mystery, but practical measures are proving effective. A traveling physician visiting your village embodies this shift.
Unlike pre-plague doctors, steeped in Galen's ancient texts, he trusts observation over dogma. "I don't bleed patients," he declares, defying centuries of tradition. "I've seen those bled during plague die faster than those left alone." This empirical approach, born from the failure of traditional medicine during the Black Death, marks a turning point. In 1360s Europe, healers began prioritizing results, laying the groundwork for modern medical science. The physician shares another insight. Plague spares homes kept clean, with fewer rats and mice. Keep cats and store food in sealed pots. Unknowingly, he's targeting the plague's vector, rodents, by reducing their access to human spaces. In your workshop, you've adopted similar habits. Gone are the days of scattered scraps. Now the floors are swept daily, and a pair of cats prowls, keeping vermin at bay. These changes, documented in 14th century health manuals, measurably reduced disease transmission.
One crisp autumn day, a stranger stumbles into the village square, flushed with fever and swaying. The crowd freezes, but the plague warden acts swiftly. "Stay back," he bellows, blocking anyone from approaching. The man is led to a hut outside the village, given water and bread, but kept isolated. The priest, donned in his eerie leather suit with its herb-stuffed beak mask, visits to offer prayers and assess the illness. When he returns, the village holds its breath. "Not the plague," he announces, prompting a collective exhale of relief. "A marsh fever, likely," the priest declares, his voice muffled by the beak mask. He stays isolated until he's well. This calculated caution marks a seismic shift from the pre-plague world, where disease was often seen as divine wrath or cruel fate. Now it's something to be managed through human effort. Even children's play reflects this new mindset. One evening, you watch young ones in the square, chanting a new rhyme. "Ring-a-ring-a roses, a pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." They spin, collapse in laughter, and rise again. Scholars later debate whether the rhyme, emerging in the plague's wake, nods to its symptoms, rosy rashes, or preventatives, herb posies. But its presence shows how deeply the epidemic has seeped into culture, even shaping children's games. Folklorists trace similar rhymes across 14th century Europe, a testament to the plague's lasting imprint.
By 1370, your village faces a small plague outbreak, not the cataclysm of 1348, but chilling nonetheless. The new systems shine: marked doors, isolated sick, village-wide cleanups, and restricted travel. Only 6 families fall ill, and the disease doesn't engulf the community as before. Lives are still lost, medieval medicine remains crude, but the death toll is a fraction of the first wave's horror. In England, records from the 1370s show such measures reduced mortality in smaller outbreaks, with containment cutting spread by up to 50% in some areas. One evening, Outside your workshop, you overhear two young men, born after the Great Plague, discussing its lore. "My father says it was God's punishment for our sins," one claims. "My grandmother swears it was poisoned wells," the other counters. "She still avoids public fountains." You smile faintly at these lingering myths. While religious explanations and conspiracy theories persist, practical knowledge has taken root. It's tied to filth and rats. Keep your home clean, let cats hunt vermin, stay clear of the sick. It improves your odds. They nod, respecting your voice as an elder who survived the great dying. Your hard-earned wisdom carries weight. This passing of practical know-how was vital. Across Europe, communities shared observed strategies, cleanliness, isolation, without grasping the bacterial cause, laying the foundation for modern public health. By 1374, 27 years after the Black Death's arrival, Venice pioneers a bold step, a permanent quarantine station, or lazaretto, on a lagoon island. Ships, crews, and goods suspected of carrying plague are detained there for 40 days before entering the city. A merchant brings this news to your alehouse. "The Venetians have it right," the miller says. "Block the sickness before it spreads." "We should build something similar," a villager adds. "A hut for travelers to wait out a week." The idea catches fire, and within months, your village erects a modest quarantine station, a simple shelter with beds and a hearth. Your trade, once limited to boots and saddles, now serves this new frontier of disease prevention. Across Europe, such ingenuity flourished. In 1377, Ragusa's quarantine system inspired Venice's lazaretto, and by the 1380s, ports like Marseille adopted similar measures, slashing outbreak severity.
These shifts reshape your daily life. You wash more often, scrubbing hands and face where once you'd have let grime linger. Your cottage is kept tidy, food stored in sealed jars to deter rats. You watch for fever or fatigue in yourself and others, intuitively grasping contagion's threat. These habits, uncommon before the plague, reflect a growing awareness of prevention. One sweltering summer day in 1374, as you work outside your shop, shaping a hide, you notice a man across the square, staring intently at you. The man's face tugs at a distant memory, though you can't quite place him. As he draws closer, recognition sparks. "Martin," you ask, hesitant. It's him, the older tanner arrested over 20 years ago for rallying workers. His hair is now snow-white, his gait marked by a slight limp, but his sharp eyes haven't changed. "Didn't think you'd remember me," he says with a warm grin. You invite him to sit, pouring a mug of ale. He accepts it gratefully, recounting his years wandering the region, taking work where he finds it. "Things are different now," he observes, scanning the village. "Some things," you agree. Wages never climbed back to those wild post-plague days, but they're still better than before. And there are fewer lords to order us about. He shakes his head, gesturing to a house with a white cloth tied to its door, signaling illness. "I meant those markers. In my father's time, sickness was a private affair. Now it's everyone's concern." He's pinpointed a profound shift. The plague years turned health into a communal responsibility, birthing public health systems. By the 1370s, towns across Europe enforced disease monitoring, a radical departure from the past's individualism. As dusk settles, Martin prepares to move on, leaving you with a thought that captures your world's strange duality. "The plague stole half our lives," he says, "but it taught us to grip what's left with both hands." His words linger as you return to your workshop. The Black Death was a cataclysm, yet it forged a new society, not just a shadow of the old, but one reshaped by adaptation and resilience, even amid grief. As night falls, you lock up the tannery and head to your cottage. Unlike your medieval self, a modern audience sleeps in clean, cozy beds, in a world where pandemics are tamed by science that traces its roots to these post-plague innovations. Medieval survivors had no such comfort, but their careful observations laid the groundwork for modern medicine.
30 years have passed since the Black Death's first wave in 1347. Now, in 1380, your hair is streaked with gray, your hands weathered from decades at the tannery. The workshop thrives under your leadership, and you've trained apprentices who've opened their own shops in nearby hamlets. The world has evolved. The plague's terror is a fading memory for you, a mere tale for the young. Children born after 1348, now parents themselves. Yet its ripples endure, shaping society in ways both bold and subtle. On a crisp autumn morning, a royal tax collector rides into the village, stirring unease. Tax collectors are never welcome, but their visits have grown more loathed. "Another tax?" the blacksmith mutters, as villagers gather warily in the square. "They bled us dry last spring."
The collector, a gaunt man with skittish eyes, unfurls a parchment. "By decree of King Richard II's council," he reads, "a poll tax is levied on all persons over 15, regardless of rank or wealth, 4 groats each." The crowd's murmurs swell into outrage. Poll taxes, flat fees ignoring income, crush the poor while barely denting the rich. This is the 3rd such tax since 1377, each sparking resentment. "4 groats?" a farmer shouts. "That's a week's wages for a laborer." The collector presses on, ignoring the heckling. "Payment is due within 30 days. Non-payers face imprisonment." He glances at the bristling crowd, adding hastily, "I'm just the messenger. Parliament approved this." Agnes, now in her 60s, but as sharp-tongued as ever, steps forward. "And who's in Parliament? Not us?" She's right. In 1380, England's Parliament was dominated by nobles and wealthy merchants with no voice for common folk. The poll taxes, meant to fund wars with France, fueled unrest, setting the stage for the 1381 Peasants' Revolt.
Parliament in 1380 is a fortress of privilege, packed with nobles and wealthy merchants, leaving common folk voiceless. As the tax collector hurries away, flanked by the headman to the village's edge, the crowd lingers, their anger simmering. "First, they choke our wages with their laws," a carpenter growls. "Now they strip what's left with these poll taxes." "They claim it's for the French wars," another villager spits. "What do we gain from their battles?" This fury isn't unique to your hamlet. Across England, 30 years of economic suppression following the brief empowerment after the Black Death have stoked deep resentment. The poll taxes, levied 3 times between 1377 and 1380, are the flint sparking a smoldering rage, setting the stage for the 1381 Peasants' Revolt. That evening, a stranger slips into the alehouse, dressed plainly, but speaking with a scholar's polish. He buys a round of drinks, listening intently to the villagers' grievances about the new tax. "It's the same from Cornwall to York," he says at last. "The working folk are being bled dry." "What can we do?" a young farmer asks, voice bitter. "They've got swords, we've got pitchforks." He leans in, eyes glinting. "In Essex and Kent, people are organizing, secret gatherings, plans for action. The room hushes. Such talk borders on treason. What kind of action, you ask warily. He studies you before answering. A petition first, thousands strong. A chorus of voices might pierce where a few are ignored. He pauses, letting the unspoken linger. And if that fails? Historical records from 1381 confirm such clandestine meetings as workers and peasants began coordinating resistance against crushing taxes and wage laws.
Over the next weeks, whispers of these gatherings grow louder. Young men from your village slip away at dusk, returning late with eager eyes but tight lips. Thomas, Agnes's grandson and your tannery apprentice, sports a fresh bruise on his jaw one morning. Run into a wall, you ask, knowing better. He glances around, ensuring privacy. King's men broke up a meeting last night, he mutters. You're treading dangerous ground, you warn. Thomas squares his shoulders. Is it dangerous to demand fairness? They crush us with laws and steal our coin. His words echo your own journey, the fleeting freedom post-plague, the harsh clampdown of the statute of laborers, and now these punishing taxes. You can't argue with his fire. As winter 1380-81 looms, tax collection turns brutal. Some families sell pots and cloaks to scrape together the 4 groats per person. Others, with multiple adults, face impossible demands. You witness a family evicted from their cottage, their meager belongings seized for tax debts. The mother cradles a wailing babe, the father stands helpless, and their eldest daughter, barely 16, is hauled to the town jail until the debt is paid. A debt their lost labor makes harder to clear. Such scenes repeated across England fuel outrage. The authorities, it seems, have forgotten a lesson from the plague, push people to the edge, and they turn defiant. In 1381, chroniclers like Froissart noted that desperation, coupled with the memory of post-plague leverage, ignited rebellion. The winter crackles with tension. Secret meetings persist despite raids, with messages ferried between villages by peddlers and laborers. Talk of unified resistance grows. In May 1381, the spark ignites. Word races from Essex. Tax collectors were driven out by furious crowds. Kent follows with similar uprisings. A man named Wat Tyler leads them in Kent, Thomas says, eyes alight. And a priest, John Ball, preaches all men are equal, that serfdom defies God's will. Ball's famous sermon, When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman, challenged the feudal order's core, questioning why nobles claimed superiority when all shared the same human origins. By June, the rebellion explodes. Thousands of peasants and workers, led by Tyler, Ball, and others, march on London, demanding justice and an end to oppressive taxes and laws. Your village lies too far north to join the main rebellion, but the air hums with fervor. Young men, including Thomas, slip away to march with the rebels, while others defy local officials' demands. The village priest, sensing the congregation's mood, treads carefully in his sermon. Christ dined with sinners, he says, but he also drove the greedy from the temple. His words skirt outright support for the rebels while echoing their grievances. For 2 weeks, astonishing reports flood in. The rebels have stormed London, freed prisoners, and beheaded the Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Sudbury, and the Lord Treasurer, Robert Hales.
figures blamed for the hated poll tax. Most staggering, the 14-year-old King Richard II met the rebels at Mile End, promising to abolish serfdom and meet their demands. Hope surges through the village. Could the feudal order truly be crumbling? In 1381, chroniclers like the Anonymal Chronicle record this moment when thousands of peasants believed change was within reach. Then, the crushing blow lands. Wat Tyler was slain during a second meeting with the king at Smithfield, stabbed by royal allies in a chaotic confrontation. Leaderless, the rebellion splinters. The king revokes his promises, and royal forces launch a merciless crackdown. The news strikes your village like a hammer. Thomas and the others who left haven't returned. Dead, captured, or in hiding. No one knows. The authorities move swiftly to restore order. A minor noble arrives with armed men, his voice cold. By King Richard's decree, all unlawful gatherings are banned. Rebels will face death. The poll tax will be collected in full. To prove their resolve, they seize the village headman, accusing him of failing to report seditious meetings. His penalty, 50 lashes, the noble declares. You watch, stomach churning, as the headman is bound to a post and whipped until his back is raw. Left slumped as warning, he's a grim symbol of royal power. The soldiers ransack homes, hunting for rebel ties.
When they reach your tannery, the noble grimaces at the stench, a reaction you've seen countless times. Did any of your workers join the London rabble? He demands, eyes narrowed. You think of Thomas, possibly dead or fugitive. No, my lord, you lie. We've been swamped with spring orders. He scrutinizes you, but without proof, he moves on, adding, The king needs leather for his army. 20 top-quality hides as a loyalty tax. No excuses. After they leave, Agnes emerges from the shadows of the workshop. You lied to shield Thomas, she says softly. I did, I admit, and I may pay for it. Her aged hand grips yours, firm despite its frailty. This isn't over, she insists. They brought soldiers to crush us because they're scared. Historical accounts, like those of Froissart, note the crown's swift brutality. Hundreds executed, villages fined, stripped of customary rights, revealing fear of the rebellion's near success. In the weeks that follow, the crackdown scale emerges. Across England, rebels are hanged or hunted, communities slapped with punitive taxes and stripped of customary rights. Yet Agnes's words ring true. The ferocity betrays the elite's panic. For a fleeting moment, commoners forced the king to listen, shaking the feudal foundation. One evening, as you lock up the tannery, a cloaked figure slips inside. He lowers his hood, revealing Thomas, gaunt, a jagged scar across his brow, but alive. Thomas, your grandmother's been ill with worry. I couldn't return until now. They're stringing up anyone who was in London. Were you there? Did you see the king? Curiosity overrides your caution. His eyes light up. I saw Savoy Palace burn, he says, referring to the opulent home of John of Gaunt, torched by rebels. I watched the tower's gates flung open, prisoners freed. For 3 days, London was ours. Despite the rebellion's collapse, the memory burns bright. And now, you ask? His face hardens. I'm a hunted man, Thomas says, his voice low. I need to flee England. Ships in the northern ports carry wool to Flanders. I thought
with your merchant ties. His plea hangs heavy. Aiding a fugitive could cost you your life if discovered. Yet his earnest eyes stir memories of your youth, the heady post-plague years when the world seemed poised for change. I know a wool trader who owes me, you say after a pause, but you'll need to lie low until it's arranged. For a week, Thomas hides in your cellar, slipping out only at night. You contact the merchant, who agrees to smuggle Thomas to Bruges, disguised as a servant. The night before his departure, you share a jug of ale in the dim light. Do you regret it? The rebellion? Thomas weighs the question. We lost, he admits, but for a moment they saw us, not as serfs or tanners, but as men with voices that mattered. He takes a swig. That's worth something. Historians later echo his sentiment. The 1381 Peasants' Revolt, though crushed, forced concessions. The poll tax was abandoned by 1382. Serfdom's decline accelerated in England compared to Europe, and the idea of collective resistance took root, a dangerous precedent for the elite. Thomas slips away before dawn, his fate unknown, but his parting words linger. The world my children inherit won't be my grandfather's. We've shifted something, even if we don't live to see it. He's right. The plague's upheaval, followed by the revolt, set forces in motion that no crackdown could fully reverse. In France, the 1358 Jacquerie saw peasants rise against nobles. In Florence, the 1378 Ciompi revolt briefly handed power to textile workers. Across Europe, the lower classes began to see the feudal order as a human construct, not a divine mandate, emboldening demands for change.
Now in your 50s, you straddle two worlds, the rigid pre-plague era and the turbulent decades since. You've witnessed society's capacity for transformation, even against fierce resistance, and understand what the young firebrands like Thomas don't, that change is often slow, marked by setbacks. That summer, word spread that King Richard II has sacked despised officials tied to the poll tax, a small olive branch signaling the crown's unease. By 1382, chroniclers note such dismissals as attempts to quell unrest. Life in the village settles into a new rhythm, or what passes for it in this altered world. The tannery hums, with new apprentices filling gaps left by those who've moved on. Yet, beneath this surface calm, the social fabric has shifted. Lords still rule, but their grip is less ironclad. The commons, ordinary workers, have glimpsed their collective power, a spark not easily extinguished. One afternoon, as you guide a young apprentice through stretching a hide, he speaks up. My father says the revolt was pointless. The nobles still hold the reins, and we still pay taxes. You pause, running your hand over the leather, its raw edges now smooth and pliable. How do you convey the revolt's complex legacy? When the plague hit, it felt like the world's end. Yet survivors found possibilities no one dreamed of before. The rebellion may seem a failure now, but it sowed seeds. You meet his eyes. Your children might reap what we've planted. As the words leave your lips, you realize you believe them. Change unfolds over generations, its arc longer than any one life, but its trajectory is undeniable. The medieval world, with its ironclad hierarchies and fixed social roles, is eroding, giving way to something new, not a paradise, but a society where even ordinary people might claim a voice. That night, as you walk home through the village, you pass the ancient church, its stone walls etched with memorials to generations lost to plague and time. Within those walls, prayers have risen for victims, rebels, and kings alike. The church stands as a timeless fixture, yet you know better. You've seen change crash like a tidal wave and creep like a shadow. Nothing, not the social order, not the Lord's authority, not even the church is truly eternal. In your modern life, cushioned by stability, such truths rarely surface. You assume tomorrow will mirror today. But the post-plague years teach an enduring lesson. Systems that seem unyielding can shift through catastrophe, defiance, or the slow grind of economic reality. What matters is who shapes the world that emerges. In the summer of 1374, strange rumors drift into your region, carried by merchants and travelers, tales so wild you dismiss them as tavern exaggerations. But at a leather fair in a nearby town, you see it for yourself. In the market square, a crowd dances, not the orderly reels of feasts or the refined steps of noble courts, but a frenzied, uncontrollable thrashing. Men and women of all ages jerk and spin, limbs flailing, bodies twisting in unnatural arcs. Their faces flicker between rapture and torment. Some shriek, others laugh wildly. A few seem locked in a waking nightmare. Most shocking is their endurance. They've danced for hours, some say days. A young man collapses, gasping, his shoes stained with blood, yet others keep moving. What's wrong with them? You ask a grim-faced onlooker. Dancing plague, he replies. It started 4 days ago with one girl, now there's dozens. This phenomenon, recorded in 1374 in Aachen, Liège, and Utrecht, saw groups dance uncontrollably until exhaustion or death. Chroniclers like Raldolphus de Rivo documented up to 100 dancers in some outbreaks.
"Is it possession?" a woman in the crowd asks, clutching a cross. A cleric, visibly shaken, murmurs, "Perhaps, or a new plague in disguise." An elderly man offers another theory. They danced on unmarked plague graves. The dead curse the living. A baker blames St. Vitus's wrath for neglecting his feast. You stand transfixed by the eerie spectacle until Agnes pulls you away. "We should leave," she whispers. "Some say it spreads like plague through bad air or nearness." As you retreat, you notice the onlookers' behavior. Many clutch herb posies to their noses, a plague-era habit, while others trace warding signs against evil. Stranger still, some watch with a glint of yearning, as if drawn to the chaotic dance. The dancing plague wasn't alone in the post-plague years. Over the next decade, as your leather trade takes you farther afield, you hear of other odd outbreaks. A laughing epidemic in Swabia that gripped entire villages, children speaking in tongues after a pilgrimage in Lorraine, a town in Saxony where hundreds swore they saw the Virgin Mary in the sky. Modern scholars, like John Waller, classify these as mass psychogenic illnesses, physical symptoms triggered by collective trauma, spread through social contagion. The Black Death's devastation killing 30 to 60% of Europe and upending society, left survivors vulnerable to such episodes, their minds scarred by loss and upheaval. But in 1374, people sought other answers: divine will, demonic influence, or new diseases.
By 1380, in your 60s, you've earned the title of Plague-Wise, a survivor of the Great Mortality, whose hard-earned insights are sought by the young, especially when whispers of disease stir panic. One day, the baker's daughter, wide-eyed, asks, "Is it true you can spot plague by making someone drink goat urine? My aunt says if they retch, they're doomed." You shake your head, stifling a chuckle. "Pure nonsense. No one can foresee who'll fall ill." Since the Black Death, folk remedies and odd diagnostics have mushroomed, some harmless, like wearing herb sachets or chanting prayers, others perilous, like swallowing toxic brews thought to ward off infection. "Then how did you survive when so many perished?" she presses. It's a question you've faced countless times, with no clear answer. Luck? A quirk of your body? Divine will? You offer your usual reply. "I steered clear of the sick when I could, kept clean, ate heartily when food was plenty, and maybe God wasn't done with me yet." This mix of practical steps and resigned faith mirrors the post-plague mindset. People embraced emerging ideas of contagion while bowing to fate's unpredictability. Historical records from the 1370s show this blend of pragmatism and piety shaped survival strategies across Europe. Religious life has shifted too, evident during the summer's Corpus Christi procession, a festival that surged in prominence post-plague. A new element stands out: flagellants. Bare-chested men march through the village, scouring their backs with leather whips studded with iron. Blood streaks their skin as they chant penitential hymns, believing pain will shield them from plague. They think suffering appeases God, the priest explains, his face carefully blank. The church's stance on flagellants was uneasy. While self-mortification had roots in Christian tradition, the movement's scale, especially during the 1348-50 outbreak, threatened ecclesiastical control. Flagellant bands roaming towns and whipping themselves publicly likely spread the plague further by drawing crowds. In 1349, Pope Clement VI banned them, but smaller groups persisted into the 1380s, as chroniclers like John de Vennet noted. The villagers' reactions vary. Some cross themselves in awe, others recoil in revulsion, and a few gaze with a strange envy, as if the flagellant's fervor offers certainty in a world adrift. That evening, talk in the alehouse turns to another post-plague phenomenon: an obsession with death. "Have you seen the new mural in Thornbury's church?" a wool trader asks. "Skeletons dance across the wall, dragging kings, priests, and peasants to their graves." This is the dance macabre, or dance of death, a genre that exploded after the plague. These artworks, widespread in 1380s Europe, depicted skeletons leading all ranks to death, underscoring the plague's impartiality. Neither wealth nor status spared anyone. "I saw one at St. Paul's in London," another man adds. "The skulls grinned as they pulled the living away." This fixation on mortality seeped into everyday life. Memento mori, remember death, became a cultural thread woven into jewelry, tools, and even children's toys. Agnes's great-granddaughter, a sharp 7-year-old, shows you her wooden doll.
One side a radiant maiden, the other a skull with carved worms writhing in its sockets. "To remind me beauty fades," she says solemnly. "Mother says it keeps my heart on heaven." Before the plague, such grim toys for children would have seemed unthinkable. But in a world where death loomed large, embracing mortality felt like truth. By the 1380s, art historians note memento mori motifs in everything from rings to manuscripts, reflecting a society grappling with its fragility. The muted, practical clothing of earlier medieval times has given way to flamboyant, even absurd styles. Men sport shoes with toes so long they're chained to their knees to avoid tripping. Women perch beneath towering, horn-shaped headdresses draped in veils. "Why bother with restraint when death could claim you tomorrow?" a London tailor explains during a visit to your village, his cart brimming with bold fabrics. The wealthy saw nobles buried in pits beside paupers during the plague. Now they flaunt their riches to stand out while they live. This live for today ethos permeates post-plague culture. Chroniclers like Jean Froissart lamented a slide in morals, rising gambling, drunkenness, and licentiousness. While some sought salvation in fervent piety, others chased hedonism, embracing life's pleasures in defiance of mortality's shadow. By the 1380s, art and literature, like the Danse Macabre, reflect this tension between revelry and dread.
By 1385, another shift emerged, a growing hunger for the vernacular, languages people actually speak, not Latin. Books and poems in English, French, Italian, and German gain popularity, discussed in markets and alehouses. The plague's toll on clergy, who once monopolized Latin literacy, coupled with the rising status of common folk, fueled this change. Works like Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales in English and Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron in Italian capture this new voice. A traveling scholar commissioning leather for book bindings at your workshop explains, "Before the great mortality, Latin locked knowledge in the hands of priests and lords. The plague didn't care who read what. Now people crave wisdom in their own tongue." You ponder this later, stitching his order. You never learned to read, but your grandson, taught by the village's plague-surviving priest, can. A sign of crumbling barriers in this transformed world. By the 1390s, literacy rates in England, especially among merchants and artisans, began rising, with vernacular texts spreading ideas to wider audiences. The 1390s bring a milder plague wave, rekindling fears and strange behaviors. Some towns, misguidedly, order all cats and dogs slaughtered, believing they carry disease, a tragic error, as it frees rats, the plague's true vectors, to multiply. Others demand travelers carry health passes, early precursors to modern health certificates, as seen in 1390s Italian city records. Most curiously, plague survivors are viewed with a mix of awe and suspicion. They say a survivor's touch heals warts or fevers, a market vendor claims, hawking amulets. Rubbish, a passerby scoffs. My cousin survived the plague, and her only gift is a dreadful voice. The crowd's laughter signals another shift, gallows humor. Jokes about death and disease, once unthinkable, now pepper conversations. Even church murals blend grim skeletons with sly, comical touches, as noted in 1390s European art studies. This dark wit
Psychologists suggest helped people process trauma, turning fear into a shared jest.
By 1395, nearing 80, a rare age for the time, you grow introspective. One evening, you sit outside your workshop with Agnes, now frail but sharp as ever, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Remember the dancing plague?" she asks, her voice soft. "Sometimes I think we're all still dancing, just slower." "How so?" you reply. She smiles faintly. "We rush, building, trading, arguing, like if we stay busy enough, death won't find us. But the plague showed us it always does." Her words capture the strange world you've lived through, a society reshaped by catastrophe, yet relentless in its drive to endure, adapt, and find meaning. "A harsh truth," you reply to Agnes, "but truth holds weight even when it stings." She nods, her eyes gleaming in the fading light. Her words distill the essence of your post-plague world. The Black Death shattered illusions of a fixed natural order, divine favor, or unshakable institutions, leaving a stark realism in its wake, a willingness to face mortality and human frailty head-on. Yet alongside this sober outlook, a vibrant appreciation for life's joys emerged. The plague taught survivors to grasp fleeting opportunities, savor moments of connection, and cherish community in a world where loss was sudden. This duality permeates late 14th century culture. Church art juxtaposes grim visions of hell with tender images of divine grace. Literature, like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, probes both human despair and soaring hope. Music swings from mournful requiems to bawdy tavern ballads. Historians note that this tension between dread and vitality sowed seeds for the Renaissance, with its focus on humanism and the value of earthly existence, a shift rooted in these post-plague decades. As twilight deepens, Agnes gestures toward children playing by the village well, caught up in a lively game of circles and chants. "What are they up to?" she asks. You catch their voices. "Ring a roses, a pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down." They tumble in a giggling heap, then leap up to start anew. Whether this rhyme, documented in later centuries, truly echoes plague imagery, rashes, herbs, or cremation, remains debated by folklorists. Yet watching the children turn grim echoes into joyful play captures humanity's resilience. "They're playing at survival," you say, "weaving our horrors into their games." Agnes nods, thoughtful. "Maybe that's what we've all done, each in our way." Her words ring true. From danse macabre to flagellant processions, your society has transformed trauma into art, survival into art.
As night falls, you and Agnes shuffle inside, your steps slowed by age's aches. Your cottage, far sturdier than the drafty hut of your youth, stands as proof of the material gains since the plague. Yet the deeper changes are intangible, a shift in how people see themselves and their world. The Black Death exposed human fragility, but also resilience, upended rigid hierarchies while underscoring the need for community. These lessons, humility before fate, hope in human potential, will shape European thought for centuries, influencing thinkers from Petrarch to Erasmus. As you settle for sleep, unlike the modern ease of electric lights and soft beds, you reflect on the strange arc from catastrophe to renewal you've lived through. The dancing plagues, death-obsessed art, and odd behaviors weren't mere quirks, but vital ways humanity grappled with unimaginable loss. The year 1400 dawns, ushering in a new century. At over 80, a rare age for the time, you're a living monument, one of the last who recalls the world before the great mortality reshaped it. Your hands, once deft with leather, are now gnarled, but your mind remains sharp. The tannery now belongs to your grandson, though you visit daily, offering tips and, more crucially, stories. Young apprentices and villagers gather, eager for tales of the plague, the rebellion, and the strange years that followed. Your words bridge the old world and the new, a testament to survival in an era defined by upheaval. In 1400, England's population, still 40% below its pre-plague peak, is rebuilding, with new social currents, rising literacy, declining serfdom, hinting at a future where common voices grow louder.
In the quiet moments at the tannery, young apprentices cluster around you, eager for tales of the past. What was life like before the plague? A lanky boy asks, his eyes wide. The question stops you cold. How do you describe a vanished world, its rigid caste system, its unshakable certainties, its fixed paths for every soul? These post-plague youths, raised in a looser, more questioning society, can scarcely imagine it. It was structured, you say at last. Everyone had their place. Sons followed fathers' trades, peasants clung to the land, lords and clergy reigned unchallenged. The boy wrinkles his nose. Sounds dull. Laughter ripples among the others. Maybe, you concede, but there was comfort in knowing your role, less doubt. Yet, as the words leave your lips, you wonder if memory has softened the past's edges. Was it truly secure, or just stifling? Did its order hide unspoken hardships? Such reflections, rare for a tanner in the pre-plague world, reveal how deeply society has shifted. By the 1400s, common folk debate ideas once reserved for scholars, a legacy of the plague's upheaval.
In 1400, you travel with your great-grandson to Florence for a leather fair, your first visit in decades. The city pulses with change. New buildings soar, their arches lighter and more graceful than the squat stone structures of your youth. The Duomo, Filippo Brunelleschi's audacious cathedral dome, rises under construction, a marvel unthinkable in the old world. "Look, grandfather," your great-grandson exclaims, pointing to a workshop where a crowd gathers. Inside, a young artist, Masaccio, paints a vivid scene of pagan gods, not saints, his figures glowing with lifelike depth. This shift towards secular, classical themes, noted in 15th century art records, reflects a waning of the Church's cultural grip. The plague's failure to spare the pious loosened faith in ecclesiastical answers, though devotion persists, alongside a new curiosity for human stories. Masaccio's brushwork, using perspective to mimic three-dimensionality, captivates the onlookers. They say he paints life as it is, not flat like old icons, your great-grandson whispers. This realism, a hallmark of early Renaissance art, mirrors a post-plague hunger for truth over symbolism, born from confronting mortality's raw reality. At a friend's bookshop, shelves brim with texts in Italian, French, and English, not just Latin. Petrarch's followers, the bookseller says, showing you a bound volume of poetry celebrating human triumphs. Petrarch, a plague survivor, mourned its horrors, but championed humanism, a movement valuing human potential over divine decree. People also want Plato, Cicero, he adds. The plague's toll on scholars scattered ancient manuscripts to new hands, while questioning authority opened minds to classical wisdom. By 1400, Florence's libraries were hubs for this rediscovery, fueling the Renaissance. The city's streets hum with change. Merchant-funded civic halls eclipse church projects. Women manage workshops, a role born from labor shortages. And children of all ranks learn to read. The world's opening, your great-grandson marvels, resting by the Arno. My friend Paolo studies numbers, and his father's a tanner like us. Such mobility, unthinkable in your youth, reflects the plague's shattering of rigid structures. That evening, at an inn, merchants debate new governance models. Milan's republic faltered, but Florence's council thrives, one says. Venice balances power best, neither king nor mob, another counters. The plague's weakening of old hierarchies spurred such experiments, with 1400s Florence and Venice blending oligarchy and representation, as chronicled by historians like Niccolò Machiavelli. At dinner, craftsmen, artists, and traders mingle as near equals, a far cry from pre-plague divisions. To Lorenzo's bank, one toasts, honoring a Medici scion. The rise of banking families, leveraging wealth beyond land, funds this cultural bloom, patronizing artists like Masaccio. Back home, you reflect on this transformed world. The plague showed our frailty, you tell your great-granddaughter, stirring broth one evening, but also our strength to rebuild, to dream, to create from ruin. At 15, literate and sharp, she nods. Is that why there's so much art now? We survived the worst and chose to build? Perhaps, you reply. When half the world fell, we questioned everything. Some clung to old ways, others forged new ones. By 1410, at nearly 90, your body weakens, but your mind holds firm. From your cottage window, you watch the village evolve. A merchant-funded school teaches children of all ranks, a post-plague innovation. Women at the well discuss trade and politics, not just chores. Laborers haggle boldly with the Lord's steward. None see themselves as living in a post-catastrophe world or a rebirth. It's simply their reality, shaped by the plague's long shadow. Every facet of life in 1411 bears the mark of the Black Death's long reach, its devastation carving paths for new opportunities. One crisp spring morning, a scholar from the University of Bologna arrives, his satchel brimming with parchment. "I'm collecting survivors' tales before they're lost," he says earnestly. "Few remain who saw the great mortality. Future generations must understand how it reshaped the world." You invite him to sit, sharing a loaf and your memories. Some details blur with age, but others burn bright. The ghostly hush of deserted hamlets, futile protections of herb pouches and fervent prayers, the startling shift when laborers gained bargaining power. After hours of talk, you pinpoint the deepest change.
It wasn't something you could see, you tell him. It was in people's minds, how they questioned authority, imagined new possibilities, valued their own worth. The scholar scribbles furiously, nodding. Others say the same. The plague didn't just take lives, it shattered certainties, and from their ruins, new ideas sprouted. Your words echo chronicles like those of Matteo Villani, who noted how the plague upended social norms, fostering a bolder, more inquisitive spirit. As he departs, promising to share his work, though you doubt you'll live to see it, you reflect on your role as a living bridge, a keeper of memories, tying the old world to the new.
That summer, astonishing news arrives. The son of a former serf from a nearby village has joined a university faculty. Such a leap, unthinkable in your youth, underscores how the plague reshuffled society's order. Across Europe, similar tales emerge. In England, serfdom's formal end nears, with the 1381 Peasants' Revolt hastening its decline. By 1410, only 10% of peasants remain bound, per historical records. In Italy, city-states like Florence thrive under mixed governance, balancing merchant councils with civic input. In Germany, Johannes Gutenberg's experiments with movable type, begun around 1400, promise to democratize knowledge. The feudal framework hasn't vanished. Nobles still dominate, wealth concentrates, power corrupts, but it's grown porous, letting talent and ambition rise above birthright. Yet the post-plague world isn't a golden age. New challenges shadow new gains. The 100 Years' War between England and France rages on, draining resources. Religious disputes fester, foreshadowing later schisms. Economic divides persist, though reshaped. Plague flare-ups return, milder but still deadly, as in the 1400s outbreaks noted in chronicles. Still, the trajectory is clear. The rigid medieval order, with its fixed roles and unchallenged traditions, is yielding to a world more fluid, more open to reinvention. By winter 1412, at over 90, you feel your strength ebbing. Your family, 3 generations descended from you and Agnes, who passed 5 years ago, gathers close. Tell us once more, your youngest great-grandchild pleads, about the world before the sickness. You smile faintly. It was narrower, child, but certain. People knew their place. Sons followed fathers, peasants served lords. The church held all answers, from stars to souls. An older grandchild presses, "And after?" You pause, gathering breath. After, nothing was sure. If half the world could vanish, what else might shift? If a laborer could demand a craftsman's wage, what other rules could bend? If prayers couldn't stop death, what else might we question? A cough interrupts, and someone offers water. You sip, then continue. The plague killed more than people. It killed a way of seeing the world. From that loss, something new was born. The word lingers, rebirth, or in Italian, rinascita. Later generations will call it the Renaissance, recognizing the profound awakening sparked by the plague's shadow. As winter deepens, your family keeps vigil, a comfort denied to countless plague victims, and you sense the end drawing near. In your final lucid moments, surrounded by family, you weave a lifetime straddling 2 worlds into lessons for your descendants. The plague showed us life's brittleness, you say, voice faint but steady, but also its worth. It proved rulers can falter, yet communities can hold fast. It laid bare our powerlessness against unseen forces, but also our strength to rebuild and dream anew. On a frigid February morning in 1413, you pass quietly, a serene departure, unlike the wrenching plague deaths you witnessed decades ago. Your family grieves, but also honors a life that bridged humanity's darkest abyss and its tentative rebirth. They lay you to rest with a blend of old and new, Christian rites mingled with humanist touches, with passages from Cicero read alongside Psalms, reflecting a growing respect for both spiritual and earthly wisdom. Your gravestone bears a simple inscription, Seer of Endings, Seer of Beginnings. In 15th century England, such hybrid funerals, noted in burial records, marked the era's shifting values. In the decades after your death, the Renaissance surges forward. Filippo Brunelleschi completed Florence's Duomo in 1436, a dome defying medieval limits. By the 1450s, Johannes Gutenberg perfected his printing press, flooding Europe with books and ideas as literacy rates climbed. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west, stretching European horizons. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo craft masterpieces that exalt human potential alongside divine majesty, their works rooted in the post-plague hunger for realism and meaning. These leaps, chronicled by historians like Jakob Burckhardt, didn't erase the Black Death scars, but grew from them, from the questions it forced, the hierarchies it toppled, the certainties it broke. The plague exposed humanity's fragility, but also its tenacity, its mortality, but also its ingenuity.
The Black Death's legacy is a paradox. From history's greatest calamity bloomed its brightest renewals. The Renaissance, with its humanist ideals. The Reformation, challenging church authority. The scientific revolution, probing nature's laws. The slow unraveling of feudalism, and the rise of governance models giving voice to the commons. By 1500, serfdom in England had nearly vanished, and city-states like Florence experimented with proto-democratic councils. Today, as a modern audience rests in beds of engineered comfort and sterile fabrics, they inhabit a world forged by these shifts. The path from medieval horror to modern ease wound through centuries of questioning, trial, and reimagining what society could be. The Black Death offers a timeless lesson. Catastrophe can clear ground for the unthinkable. Not because suffering fuels progress, it doesn't, but because crises force scrutiny of beliefs once invisible. As you drift toward sleep, far from the straw pallets of 14th century survivors, this cycle of human experience brings solace. Endings cradle beginnings. Ruin can give birth to renewal. History's tale never ends. It unfolds across generations, and you too are woven into its endless thread. May that thought bring peaceful rest.